What is it that makes this happen? You know, that digital downloads just keep going lower and lower, and yet physical purchases, especially vinyl, is going up. Hey there, Robert John Hadfield from Audio Mover here again, and I want to do something a little bit different today. You know, it was probably a week or two back that the news came out that vinyl had outsold CDs for the first time in decades. And of course, I started getting texts from people that saw this in the news because all my friends know that I'm into vinyl, that I have a huge collection, and I make some of these videos, and it's just kind of one of my things. And actually, even somebody on YouTube, Joe, shout out to Joe, made a comment in one of the videos about this too. And it was pretty, it was pretty cool to hear that news. And so what I wanted to do, I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then share maybe what some of the reasons are. And before we get going here, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have old audio and videotapes, you need to convert them to digital, which you need to do so they don't deteriorate, go to AudioMovercom, AudioMover.com. AudioMover is the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and converts them to digital. And anyway, it's a great way to support the channel if you like these videos that we do. Go to AudioMover.com and you can, you or somebody you know that has old audio and videotapes can start an order there. So the report, the news was vinyl records, this is from the BBC, vinyl records outsell CDs for the first time in decades. Just over 41 million vinyl records were sold in 2022 to the tune of $1.2 billion. Only 33 million CDs were sold, amounting to $483 million. Now, that's pretty amazing. I mean, those are some big numbers, but to put it in perspective, 41 million records sold in 2022. Michael Jackson's Thriller sold somewhere like 60 million records just by itself, over time. So 41 million, that's pretty amazing when you consider records really haven't been, they kind of went out of favor back in the early 90s. So it is pretty significant. But here's the thing that really got me. The report found that revenue for physical music formats had steadily risen over the years, marked by a remarkable resurgence in 2021 after being muted by COVID-19 in 2020. Physical music revenues as a whole were up 4% last year. Now that's really something. So it's not that physical music, because when you hear stories like this, you think, well, they're outselling CDs, but they're both going down anyway. So what difference does it make? Well, here, strangely, the numbers were actually going up for physical media, propelled by vinyl records, which saw a 17% increase. Meanwhile, revenue from CDs fell 18%. Okay, but here we keep going. Physical copies of music continued to perform better than digital downloads, the report found, which saw yet another decline in revenue, dropping by 20% to $495 million. So in other words, the streaming digital downloads has been going down dramatically. It's a stark contrast from the peak popularity digital downloads once held, having made up 43% of recorded music revenues in 2023. Since then, downloads have plummeted to just 3% last year. Think about that. 43% of recorded music revenues, or 43%, of recorded music revenues in 2012 were from digital downloads, and then last year it dropped to 3%. That's crazy. I mean, that's a massive, massive difference. Now, a few weeks ago, I made a video where I talked a little bit about what it is about vinyl that was so appealing. Now, I'm always, I'm concerned about sounding like some old guy just reminiscing whenever I start down this path, and maybe I am a little bit. But there was more to records than just this nostalgia. There was something more to it. And I made a video a few weeks ago about Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and I didn't plan this, but right in the middle of it, I just started talking about vinyl and what it was that was so appealing. What made vinyl something that was such a big deal to so many of us. And And so what I did is, as I was watching back on that video, I decided to take that little segment out of the video, out of the Fleetwood Mac video, and then just post it by itself. And it was kind of this little thing, what have we lost with vinyl? So I posted that little section of the video on TikTok. This is just a couple weeks ago. And it's interesting because since I posted it, this isn't life-shattering, but it's had 18,000 views, 1,000 likes, and 300 comments. And that's what I wanted to spend a minute doing today, is I want to read some of these comments that talk about what it is about vinyl that's such a big deal. And so I went through and just kind of and picked a few of them that stood out to me. And so, and if you want, go watch that little segment of the video from the Fleetwood Mac video. Maybe I'll post it as a separate video here on the YouTube channel and elsewhere, so you can see what I'm talking about. But here are some of the comments that people made on the TikTok video when I posted that, and I thought some of these really, really got to the point. So here's one of here's one of the comments. We stared at record albums the way we stare at our phones now. The input was static and yet so provocative. And that's the truth. You know, we would bring records home and you'd put the music on and you would just stare at the vinyl. Or not just the vinyl, you'd stare at the album. You'd stare at the artwork. You'd stare at the pictures, the photos, the whatever. But and actually it's interesting because you wouldn't just do it when you're listening to the music. I mean, sometimes you'd go to a record store just to look at things. And so there was this whole visual experience. You know, you think of records and music as being something that's just through the ears, but music, when vinyl was a big deal, it was a highly visual experience too. So that's a really, really important point. The input was static and yet so provocative. It wasn't moving. There wasn't all this stuff. You actually were looking at just static images. And yet it was so provocative. Anyway, I love the way that's put there. Another one. Something about the disc smoothly turning circles while the sound comes out. I love that comment so much because there really was something to that. I was thinking about this when I was driving around earlier, putting a record on, and there was something so soothing about watching the record just spin, that constant speed, just spinning. And it was a little bit like, you know, being around a campfire and just staring at the fire. There's something hypnotizing about that. And there really was something calming or soothing about that record just spinning and looking at it. And CDs didn't have that. CDs didn't have that because you'd take a CD and you'd put it in this drawer and then it would just disappear into who knows where. You know, it would just be gone. You wouldn't see it anymore, like it it didn't exist. But the record, it was something physical that would spin and you would watch this record. You never lost sight of it. And I think that's one of the reasons that, although CDs were huge, why it's not the same. Because the CD, you put it in your car and you put it in the slit and it just goes away, goes to Neverland, where the record is there. And it's this physical manifestation of the music that you can look at, that you can actually interact with while it's playing, just staring at the thing spinning around. There was something to that, and even trying to read it while it spun. I mean, it was kind of an interesting part of the experience. But something about the disc smoothly turning circles while the sound comes out. I love that comment, and that's so true. That was actually a big part of it. Here's another comment. Friends would come over and we'd listen to albums. Seriously. Listening to music on vinyl was a social experience. I made a video not long ago that we put out where I was talking about getting invited over to somebody's place and he played Accept's album Restless and Wild for me. And oh my gosh, I remember walking into his room. I remember his posters, and then listening to that record. And part of it, you know, you would invite people over to listen to records because you couldn't just listen to this. Put your head. I mean, it wasn't like that. If you wanted to play some music for somebody, that's really what it was. Come to my house, and I want to play some stuff for you, and let's listen to records. I had a friend. He's actually now a Facebook friend. I knew him back in school, named Keith. And he would have me come over to his house because he was a big fan of the Dixie Dregs. And that's where I got introduced to Steve Morse, was listening to the Dixie Dregs at his house. And we would go to his house, and he had all this cool stuff in his room, and he'd put the album on, and we would listen to an entire album of the Dixie Dregs, later called the Dregs. And it was just, I still remember these moments, but we kind of became friends just listening to music together. But you'd have to go to somebody's house, because we'd be on the bus and he'd be like, "Hey, you ever heard the Dregs?" No. And he says, "Okay, come to my place. I want to play you some stuff." And there we were. And then, so it was a social experience, but it wasn't just listening to music then, because then, of course, you'd go to somebody's house and they'd have a whole record collection. What would you do? While you're listening to the music, you'd start flipping through the records, and you'd pull their records out, and you'd start studying their records and talking to them about, asking questions, looking at the artwork. So it was a social experience that we've lost. Records were. Next one that I thought was pretty neat, and the smell of a record store, especially those that had used music. Today, when I go back to Denver, I go to, because I'm originally from there, and I fly back there a lot of times because my family's still there, and I'm an actor, and I'm in TV commercials and things, so I have to fly back there a lot for different things. So, but I usually, whenever I go, I usually stop at a record store. And it's right. You walk into that record store and you open that door, and there's something about, I don't know if it's old cardboard or what it is, but there's a smell. And I actually talk about this in that Fleetwood Mac video that I did, that this whole listening to records was a multi-sensory experience. It wasn't just listening. You had visual, you had the smell, of course you had the hearing, you had the tactile experience of touching the records. Somebody made a comment somewhere, they mentioned Journey's album Escape. The little broken shards of glass from the sphere that the little scarab is coming out of are embossed. You can feel them on the record. So it was this multi-sensory experience. I think the only thing that wasn't involved in your senses was taste. So anyway, there was really something to that. So anyway, the smell of the record store, I love that comment. Here's another one. Listening to music was an activity in and of itself. Now people listen to music while thumbing through social media. We connected in every way. So the similar idea as the other comment, where listening to music was an activity in and of itself. The reason that stood out to me was that you were listening to music, and that was the thing. Today you listen to music and you never stop being entertained. There's always something to look at. And even though we would look at records, sometimes listening to music was, you'd put the vinyl on and you just lay on your bed and you'd stare at the ceiling. And the input was just, I'll tell you, the song The Boys of Summer, that might be one of my favorite songs ever. I love that song. And I loved it so much when it came out. Even though I had the record, I would intentionally not listen to it because I didn't want to lose the feeling that it gave me when I listened to the song, because it was so powerful. And I literally would save specific times to listen to that song. And I would almost plan it, like, I need to listen to that song today. And I would very carefully get it, I'd put it on, and I'd lay down on the bed, and I would listen to the song. And I would want to just be able to soak it in as much as I could. And that whole experience of having that record that I always knew was sitting over there if ever I needed it, at how a teenager thinks, right? But if I ever needed it, it was there. And it would sit in my collection. So it sounds so strange now, but it was a teenage boy, and that was part of the experience of listening to music. So it was listening to music was an activity in and of itself, because you weren't constantly listening to music. You weren't constantly hit by media. You would, like I did, even reserve time to go listen to something because you needed to hear something. Let's see here. Oh, this one is pretty cool. We would hit the huge Peaches records and tapes in Dearborn, pick up the current or two release and hit Closeout Bins Many purchases by jacket. There's so many things in this post. First of all, the Peaches Records and Tapes in Dearborn. All of us had that record store, didn't we, that we would go to. And here's this person, the Peaches Records and Tapes in Dearborn. I had Sound Warehouse, and I knew where it was. It was on the cross streets of University and Dry Creek. And that was a mecca for me to go to this place. We all had that place that we would go to that was kind of like home base for music. And this is it. He had this record store, he or she, I'm not sure, had this record store that they'd go to. And then they'd pick up the current releases, but then they'd go to the Closeout Bins and buy purchases by jacket. I mean, you remember that? There were bins that they were just trying to get rid of records because they'd purchased too many, had too many extra copies, and so they'd mark the records down, and you just go, this looks interesting. I've never heard of this. It's only a couple bucks, and I'd buy it, and we'd walk out with it. And it says many purchases by jacket. How often did you buy records just because it looked cool? And sometimes, I used to buy, I remember the band Nazareth had a whole bunch of records that were in the cutout bins. And I remember buying a whole bunch of Nazareth albums just because they were in the closeouts. And I didn't necessarily, I like that I have them, but I didn't really like the albums. But I was able to get some cool music that I don't think was worth the full price, but still I got some cool songs because I saw some record covers specifically by Nazareth, and there were a lot others. I'm just saying that one in particular, I remember that I bought a bunch of their records because they were in closeout bins, and I actually ended up liking a lot of their stuff. So anyway, that's really cool. That whole post, I love that. Next one. Oh my gosh, I love this one too. We would play the album over and over, discussing each song. We knew all the lyrics within 2 days and displayed the sleeves in my room. And then, I think this was a second post by the same person. The best, when my fave artist released an album, I was at the store that day. My cousin and I would race to my house to listen to the entire album together. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's so true. We'd play the album, like I said, this first part, we'd play the album over and over, discussing each song. Isn't that the truth? I had a friend back in Denver when I was growing up that was really into lyrics. Of course, and I was a guitar player, kind of a heavy metal kid, and so I was always fascinated by the guitar playing and the different tones and things. And yet we would sit and talk about music, and he introduced me to this whole other, I never cared much about the words, but when he and I met, we would sometimes listen to music together, and he would point out some of these lines, these words that I just kind of went right past me that I never thought about. And it kind of brought this whole nother level of the music to me. And that's what's so great about this post, is just discussing each song. We really would do that. You'd listen to a song and you'd hear some words or you'd hear some tone or something and go, dude, I love the way he did that. That was so cool. Anyway, that was a big deal. So anyway, what a great post. And then when my favorite artist released an album, I would be in the store that day. I had so many records that I bought that way, where I knew the day that it was going to be at the store, and I showed up that day and bought it. So that was really something. It's similar today when we know something's coming out, but it was different that you had to work for it. You'd get in a car and you'd go somewhere. It was a big deal. So anyway, what a great post. Oh, here's another. Okay, so this is similar to something I said a minute ago. I would lay on my bed devouring the album cover and the sleeve while that album played. And it says my albums was my smartphone in the 70s. That's funny. I would lay on my bed devouring the album cover and the sleeve while that album played. It's true. You'd put that record on, you'd lay down, and you just sit there and stare at at the cover. And so many album covers were so great. And the liner notes, the inserts, sometimes they'd have fold-out posters and so many things in there. And even things like things to order stuff. Like Kiss, of course, always had that stuff, but other bands too. I have an Iron Maiden album, Number of the Beast. They had a thing where you could pull it out, and they had the different, all this different stuff you could buy. Like I think they had one that was like a leather bracelet with studs on it, and I'd sit there and look at this stuff too, and you'd think, wow, it'd be cool to get that. It'd be cool to get this thing, and Anyway, that was pretty neat too. All the different things you could look at. Oh, and then this person posted, and cleaning your records. Was that not the truth? You know, you would go try so hard to make sure that those records stayed clean. For me personally, I got in this habit of just never actually touching the record. I'd hold it a certain way and put it in so gingerly, and then you'd have all the little felt thing that would take the dust off, and you had all these different ways of just keeping that thing immaculate and keeping it clean. And in a way, it became a teacher on how to respect things that you owned. And because you bought it too. I mean, I went and spent, it wasn't much, but it was $7.99. I remember that specifically, $7.99. All the albums I bought were $7.99 plus tax, so it'd be $8.24 or something like that. But I remember $7.99. And I had to work for that money. I had a job. And then you'd buy the thing, and you wanted that thing to be immaculate. And so you would take such good care of it. And so most of my records, sometimes when I pull them out here to do these little reviews and talk about them, it's the first time they've ever been touched, because I would take it so gingerly out of the shrink wrap and slip it into that plastic. It was awesome. Anyway, but that was a big deal. Cleaning, we were so meticulous, and it really taught you the value of owning something and taking immaculate care of something. This one was kind of interesting. Buying album based on their covers was my way of collecting art since we didn't have a lot of money. It's true. You gained an appreciation for artwork. A lot of these albums, because these bands put a lot of thought a lot of times into the cover. That cover had to mean something. Billy Squier, for example, the album cover for Emotions in Motion, that was painted by Andy Warhol. That was a gift from Andy Warhol to Billy Squier, a painting that he'd done. And so there was a lot of really amazing artwork that was on records, and you would kind of learn to appreciate what are the kinds of things that I like. And a lot of people like myself, I remember in art class, a lot of people would paint album covers that already existed. And so you'd find an album cover that really spoke to you for some reason, and you'd paint it. And so you really did gain appreciation for art through these albums. Anyway, I thought that was so cool. It was a way of collecting art. I know he puts an LOL at the end, or she, I don't know. But that was a really important thing, that we really did gain an appreciation for art in that way. The next one, the resurgence of the young people these days are buying vinyl records is here. My 20-year-old daughter loves her record collection, as do her friends. So true. And this is what I was, driving at with this whole video that I'm making here, is that what is it that makes this happen? That digital downloads just keep going lower and lower, and yet physical purchases, especially vinyl, is going up. Now, I don't expect that's going to go on forever, but there is something to that we want to hold on to, something that we want to have a physical representation. It's a connection to that music that isn't just through your ears. It's a physical connection. It's a visual connection. There's more to it. And kids in today's world, this isn't just me being it is kind of me just being an old man, but kids get that. They want that extra connection. And so they go buy it, and to have that, even how often do I listen to my records? I don't listen to them very often, but I have them. I hold on to them because they represent something. It's a connection to an artist. The music is sitting there on that record, ready to be released, but just having those things. And I sometimes will just go in there and stand by it and pull the records out and look at them.